While everyone was watching the XRP price, Ripple spent $4 billion building an empire. They bought a $1.25 billion prime broker. They got 500 million from Citadel and Fortress, as well as partnering with America's oldest bank and connected with Mastercard, Franklin Templeton, AWS. Today, I'm going to show you the business relationships that prove Ripple isn't playing the crypto game, they're playing a Wall Street game. Hidden Road is a 1.25 prime broker acquisition that really no one understands in a sense. In April of 2025, Ripple made its biggest acquisition yet, building Hidden Road. It's a multi-asset prime broker for 1.25 billion. The crypto world barely noticed. So let's start with that. Something huge that flew under the radar. In April of 2025, Ripple acquired Hidden Road. Now, if you're thinking, what is a prime broker and why does this matter? Prime brokers are the middlemen that hedge funds, institutions, and big players use to execute trades, get leverage, and access liquidity. By October, Ripple rebranded Hidden Road as Ripple Prime. Now, it's grown 3x since the acquisition. Ripple isn't just a payments company anymore. They're becoming a full stack financial services provider offering custody, trading, settlement, and prime brokerage. You can almost think of Ripple as building their own Goldman Sachs, but for crypto. Hidden Road acquisition is Ripple's Trojan horse into traditional finance. By owning a prime brokerage infrastructure, they can service institutional clients who never could touch crypto exchanges before, but will absolutely work with regulated prime broker that happens to support digital assets. Okay, let's talk about the Fortress and Citadel. This time, when Wall Street writes a $500 million check. So in November of 2025, Ripple raised $500 million at a $40 billion valuation led by Fortress Investment Group and Citadel Securities. This isn't just venture capital, this is Wall Street's A team validating Ripple's model. Now, here's where things get kind of interesting. In November of 2025, Ripple closed a $500 million strategic investment round at $40 billion valuation led by Fortress and Citadel, right? So for context, Citadel is one of the most powerful market makers on the planet to date. These aren't just crypto VCs making a speculative bet. These are Wall Street institutions backing Ripple's infrastructure. So what's changed here? Ripple's acquisition spree basically proves that they're serious about owning the rails, right? Fortress and Citadel aren't betting on Ripple's XRP price. They're betting on Ripple becoming the financial plumbing for tokenization of assets, cross-border settlements, and institutional crypto trading. And when Wall Street writes that size of a check, that magnitude, they're done with their due diligence. I think we can all agree. Fortress and Citadel investment signals a fundamental shift. Ripple is no longer just a crypto company, it's a fintech infrastructure provider that happened to use blockchain. And that distinction matters. It massively opens up institutional adoption. Let's talk a little bit about the BNY Mellon. The Bank of New York Mellon, it was founded in 1784, one of 8 systemically important U.S. banks. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that partnership. In, I believe, July of 2025, the Bank of New York, Mellon, one of the largest banks in America, agreed to custody the reserves that are backing Ripple's RLUSD stablecoin. BNY Mellon manages $48 trillion in assets. They don't do deals with crypto companies. They do deals with institutions that they trust to meet a regulatory standard. So, what does this mean exactly? When a systemically important US bank agrees to custody your stablecoin reserves, you've officially crossed the bridge from a crypto startup to a trusted financial institutional provider. This is the regulatory moat that 99% of stablecoin providers will never have. Here's another key insight. BNY Mellon custody partnership isn't just something that's symbolic, it solves one of the number one barriers to institutional stablecoin adoption, the trust factor, the trust in reserve management, right? When a bank with 240 plus years of history backs your reserves, corporations or institutions can finally use your stablecoin without any type of career risk, right? Okay, let's dive into the Mastercard, Gemini, and WebBank situation. The RLUSD credit card that I don't think many people saw this coming either. November 2025, at Ripple Swell, Ripple announced a partnership with Mastercard, Gemini, and WebBank to partner stablecoin settled credit card transactions using RLUSD. This is essentially the bridge between traditional payments and blockchain. Here's where it gets a little bit crazy. Ripple announced a pilot, again, Mastercard, Gemini, and WebBank to test stablecoin settlement for credit card transactions. When you swipe a Gemini branded Mastercard credit card, the settlement happens on the XRPL ledger, and it's using the RLUSD, not through traditional banking rails. Credit card settlements are still slow, they're expensive, they require multiple intermediaries. If Ripple can prove instant, cheap, blockchain based settlements that work for MasterCard at scale, they're not just disrupting cross border payments, they're basically coming for the entire card processing industry. That's a multi-billion-dollar business in itself. I don't think we're even thinking about that. We're primarily thinking about cross-border movement of value, right? We're thinking about NFTs. We're thinking about value exchange. But what about credit card processing in itself, right? Something to think about. The MasterCard partnership is another Trojan horse into consumer payments. Most people think that Ripple is a B2B only, bank to bank. But stablecoin settlement, with credit cards could mean RLUSD is like an invisible backbone of millions of consumer transactions without users even knowing that they're using the blockchain. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Franklin Templeton situation, right? They're tokenizing treasuries on the XRPL. This is massive. Tokenizing treasuries. This is a government product, right? So let's look into this partnership a little bit closely. DBS Bank, Franklin Templeton, and Ripple have basically partnered up. They're going to tokenize money market funds on the XRP ledger. Franklin Templeton manages what, $1.5 trillion in assets. They're not using the XRPL to tokenize, just small money market funds. They're allowing accredited investors to trade 24/7, using it as collateral for loans, and settlement is instant. So the bigger picture here is that real world asset tokenization is the next $1 trillion crypto use case. Ripple just landed a trillion-dollar asset manager, all on the XRPL as a platform. When traditional financial giants tokenize their assets, they're already picking the winners, and they picked Ripple. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the partnership between AWS and Ripple. They're going to enhance, furthermore, cross-border payments. And we're speaking about a huge partnership here. They've officially listed Ripple as one of their verified partners. RippleNet runs on the AWS cloud infrastructure that gives banks, financial institutions the ability to integrate Ripple payment rails directly through AWS. This is huge, right? AWS is like the cloud backbone of half the internet. When enterprises are looking to adopt blockchain tech, they're coming directly to Amazon. They don't want to deal with random crypto infrastructure. They want AWS level reliability, security, and compliance. Ripple AWS partnership means that banks can adopt RippleNet with the same level of trust that they already have with their existing cloud services. This is massive for institutional adoption, yeah? Okay, let's talk a little bit about Brian Ballard. This is Trump's lobbyist that got Ripple in some hot water. Let's talk about it. 2024, Ripple hired Brian Ballard, a longtime Trump fundraiser and power lobbyist, right, to lobby on primarily crypto regulation. This move kind of backfired when Trump discovered XRP promoted by Ballard's client, leading to the Mar-a-Lago fallout. Something basically went very wrong. Ripple hired this guy, and Ballard, who had deep ties to the Trump administration, and Ripple paid him nearly 800K to lobby on their behalf. But here's where it got kind of messy. In March of 2025, Trump posted about XRP on social media and later found out Ballard was the one that was pushing him to mention it. You know, Trump felt used, and Ballard was temporarily on ice at the White House. Here's why this matters. It reveals Ripple's playbook. They're not just building tech, they're building political relationships at the highest level. Even if one backfired, it shows that Ripple plays the Washington game just as hard as Wall Street does. That's something to pay attention to going forward. All right, let's talk a little bit about central bank digital currencies and the Ripple impact. One of the most unreported Ripple stories of all is the CBDC story. You know, Ripple has engaged over 20 central banks to help pilot CBDCs, right? They're interacting with countries, like Bhutan and Montenegro and Colombia and plenty of others we know of. You know, Ripple launched their CBD platform back in 2023, I believe, in May. And it was specifically designed to help governments create, manage, and distribute digital versions of a national currency. 90% of central banks are exploring CBDCs. If Ripple's platform becomes the go-to infrastructure for government-issued digital money, that already positions themselves as the Mastercard or the Visa of CBDCs. Here's something that the crypto influencers are kind of ignoring. This is because it's not that sexy to talk about and it's not speculative, but it's exactly how Ripple could position themselves as a systemically important over the next decade. Just something to think about, right? Let's talk a little bit about RJAX in the United Kingdom. One of the major partnerships is with RJAX. It's a UK-based regulated digital securities exchange. In June of last year, Ripple and RJAX announced that they plan to bring hundreds of millions of dollars in tokenized real-world assets to the XRP ledger. By November of late 2024, RJAX provided access to Aberdeen's money market fund. That's a UK asset manager. It tokenized on the XRP ledger. Now, Ripple is racing to onboard all of these different traditional finance assets onto the blockchain. While other blockchains are kind of fighting for DeFi protocols and NFTs, Ripple is tokenizing these treasuries, their money market funds, their equities, bonds, and even real estate. That's a multi-trillion-dollar market that institutions actually care about. And here's another key insight. RChex validates Ripple's RWA strategy. Instead of creating this synthetic crypto asset, they're just tokenizing the real assets from the real world that institutions already trust. This approach bypasses it as a crypto real, right? The debate is entirely because the underlying asset are government bonds, treasuries, and regulated funds. All right, that's it for today, guys. Thank you again.